LSU travels to Columbia, South Carolina, Williams-Brice Stadium, College game day on hand to take on the Gamecocks. And the question is this: where does this rank amongst the most important games in the Brian Kelly tenure in Baton Rouge? Helping us break down that and much more, all things LSU. He's one of the best in the business, does a fantastic job. Someone I'm grateful to call a friend, Blake Ruffino of AYS Sports, and also the Ruffino and Joe Show. Blake, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Well, I currently, I don't know if you see these big old traps and muscles that have gotten a workout this morning, but it's not because I'm lifting weights. You know, it's just got a lot going on. Hurricane coming into town, which Chris, let's just be honest, is going to be a big thing that you and I are about to discuss here. So if people don't know, you know, there is a Category 2 hurricane that's coming into Louisiana, and, you know, Baton Rouge and the area that I'm in is going to be on the worst side of this storm. So, but it's a big day outside of that. It's a big situation outside of that. Like you mentioned, College game day is going to be there. You're going to be there. Our buddy Josh Pate's going to be there. So a lot of people are focusing in on this game. And Chris, I'm going to be honest. Name a bigger game for Shane Beamer, and then name a bigger game for Brian Kelly in the last 3 seasons. Now, I know Beamer's had, you know, other ones like being Clemson, Tennessee, stuff like that. But if South Carolina goes 3-0, you know, what are these conversations that happen there? But I think the bigger thing is that LSU already has a loss, and if they go to Columbia and they lose, then what? What are we going to say about the Brian Kelly era at LSU at the current moment? So a lot of different things. It's 11 a.m. kickoff. LSU's going through a hurricane, so it's just a lot of different things. We're going to really see how both of these teams respond.
Blake, I want to go directly there because I have to admit, when I saw, I believe it was on AYS, that was one of your lead topics, the biggest game of the Brian Kelly era. That sort of surprised me, just because I think about some of the big wins they've had and big games. And you know, we talked about it over the offseason. That game against Southern Cal in week 1 was the most important game of the season. And then we're talking about this game at South Carolina and how much things can change. Obviously, the most important game of BK's tenure. So what makes it the most important game in your mind? I mean, obviously, we know LSU's back in the corner for the college football playoff and their hopes this year, and you just can't really afford a second loss with Ole Miss still on the schedule, Alabama at Texas A&M, the rest of the slate. So, I mean, dive into that, because, again, I got to admit, I was a little bit surprised to see that. I hadn't really thought about the fact that this might be the biggest game of Brian Kelly's tenure thus far at LSU.
Well, think about it like this. So, you know, I've listened and covered and watched everything that BK has done since he's been here. And what I mean, obviously, most reporters do, right, Chris? I mean, you cover the SEC, you know, I mean, you do the same thing. But he said, I wait until year 3. Well, so he put the label on even last year when Jaden Daniels was here. You guys, like, you got to give me until year 3. Well, then you lose to Southern Cal. And Chris, what's the current perception of LSU? Oh, here they go again, underperforming in big moments. Well, you can't get a bigger moment if you're in the SEC than College game day. And by the way, College game day hasn't been where LSU is going or at least not to Baton Rouge, I should say, since 2019. And Joe Burrow and the boys came into town and was snapping necks and cashing checks like it's the Catalina wine mixer, okay? So I look at not just what LSU's perception is at the current moment and what they have to accomplish and what Brian Kelly said he wanted to accomplish in year 3. Chris, a lot of this, too, has got to go with South Carolina, too. When you line up and you beat the dog snot, not just on your defensive line and defense, Chris, I'm going to give that offensive line some credit. We were breaking the film down on Sunday. I thought Kentucky's defense was going to be better than that. But, man, they got pushed around, dude. I'm like, uh-oh, they're in trouble. And I think, you know, talking about Kentucky, you know, Stoops maybe wanting to go to A&M, maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know. But, man, South Carolina, the moment wasn't big enough for them, it felt like. They were the more locked-in team. Mistakes did not rattle them. And, Chris, I got to say this. With Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders, when they're going to run the ball 50 times at you, in the fourth quarter, what you going to do? Because when you got 600 pounds of beef running right at you or 500 pounds of beef running right at you, it's going to take a toll on you. So, first off, pause when I said beef. But, I mean, that's the thing that I think wraps this game around that I'm like, look, man, if you're not careful, you're going to go to Columbia and get beat. But here's the thing for me, though, Chris, to end it here. You're going through so much adversity this week. And I think because of going through a hurricane, going through all of this, Brian Kelly has been labeled as what? The ultimate guy that talks about discipline, determination, grit, being physical up front. Well, you about to get tested now, dog. Because, Chris, if they were going up against the school of the blind and deaf, it would still be that big for me because you're going – like, Chris, we might – think about it like this. You were in college. I was in college. Think about being without electricity for 3 days and then having to go to practice and then going home. That's what they're going through. So Brian Kelly's not from here. I've been through 3 Category 5 hurricanes that have hit my home directly, okay? I know how to deal with it. But a guy from Massachusetts, I don't know if he knows how. Now, let me, before everybody like ridicules me for just a second, I just want to say I think he's smart enough to come up with a really good plan, okay? So I'm not trying to say that. But is there something that he's not thinking is going to be a bigger impact than what it is? Chris, this place floods. What if you can't get out? And those are the small things. And I'll leave this with South Carolina fans. Remember when I think it was flooding in Columbia and South Carolina came down here and Leonard Fournette raffled off his jersey to give money to the football program? Like, think about that whole situation that people in Columbia went through. It's going to be a little bit more of a bigger magnitude this week for LSU. Sorry that was long-winded, but just so much to unpack.
Yeah, the 2015 game. Yeah, recall that one really well. That was a LSU blowout in Death Valley. Again, that game was supposed to be played in Columbia, to your point, kind of roles reversed this time around, which you hate to see. But, yeah,
right.
even more magnitude because of where the location is.
And we haven't been there in 16 years, by the way.
Right, yeah.
LSU hadn't been there in 16 years. We haven't been there since 2008. So that's another thing. And look, man, I was there in 2008. That place gets loud. I mean, that place gets really loud. And, of course, you'll know better than most. I mean, how does Garrett Nussmeier on a true road test in a week, how does he do with crowd noise? I mean, that's a whole nother different topic that we got to discuss.
And Blake, I want to, again, just piggyback off that. When we're talking about most important game for BK and what it means for him, we're not talking about hot seat, are we? We're not talking like him being fired, right? We're not talking about that.
$70 million laying around.
Right. So we're not talking, but just in regards to competitive pressure, the pressure that is going to follow you at LSU.
Perception, reality.
People are going to be very upset. They're going to be very upset. If you thought they were upset after week 1, yeah, lose in week 3. And
they'll kick the doors down. I mean, this place.
I think I heard you use the term pitchforks this week.
Oh, yeah. Look, regardless if I agree with the pitchforks or not, look, this place is not a place that you don't go 9-3. Now,
I would say I heard somebody say 10-2 gets you fired at LSU.
Yeah, it does. But see, here's the thing: LSU fired Les Miles, who was relatively massively successful. When you take a step back and look at it in its totality, right? Like, I mean, the dude's the winningest coach at LSU. He got to 2 national championships. He won 1. He lost another to the greatest of all time. There's nothing to be ashamed about that at all. By the way, that same season he beat him 9-6 in what people believe is the best game of all time, when you had 70-plus guys on those teams and on those rosters that played in the NFL, Chris. So when I look at Les Miles as an example, you got fired because you kept going 9-3, right? And so if we're going to fire you because you're not getting to 10 wins in the regular season, this place is just not – Chris, look what they do in baseball. I mean, you get to 45 wins and they're panicking. And I'm like, what? Okay, relax. And then Jay goes on an impressive run in the SEC championship or SEC conference and Hoover and all that. So those are the things that I'm saying. And that's what I thought it was going to be Ole Miss, because I never saw South Carolina doing last week what they did after what they did to Old Dominion. But, Chris, when you go down and break down that film now, I'm telling you, you better not play with them up front. You better not go into Columbia and start playing around, because a guy that I love who is a coach in the SEC, I started asking him questions this week, and a line guy. I'm like, bro, are you seeing what Columbia, what's going on in Lexington, what them dudes from Columbia are doing? He goes, it's a whooping. And that's the fact when LSU hasn't been able to run the football the last 2 weeks, Chris, that I worry about. This Stewart kid, if that kid hit the portal, he'll get $2 million a year. Like, he's that good. I mean, that kid's special. So those are the concerns, and that's why this pressure continues to build. Chris, at 8:30, I sent out a tweet like, "Hey, man, all right, LSU, you bet. All right, y'all think that we're gonna walk in Columbia and beat the snot out of them? All right, they ain't playing with you. So as my Meemaw will say, I ain't playing with you, boy. So that." I feel like I'm coming off as like really intense, but that's when I'm like, that's the pressure that I feel like it's going on in Baton Rouge right now.
Blake, when you look at the matchup, again, we started a deep dive. But when you look at the matchup, what gives you confidence for LSU? What gives you concern? Like you said, I think the thing most surprising for me is that you look at that game against Nichols. I mean, 64 rushing yards. That's you tell me if I'm missing something here, but it just seems befuddling that, LSU, we talked about them maybe having the best offensive line in college football, and the running game, just outside of John Emery, who unfortunately went down with the injury in week 1, the running game just has not been there.
I'm going to show you this, Chris, and I apologize to all of your viewers here, but let me show you this. This is the film that we were breaking down against Nichols. Now, if you could see right there, that's 9 guys in the box. Okay. So what did USC do? What did Nichols do? Chris, they're literally daring Garrett Nussmeier to beat him. And they're being stubborn to some extent on not just throwing the football around, because LSU came out and this whole offseason was, hey, man, this offensive line's good. And, Chris, they got a lot of push. But when you have 9 guys 10 yards or less to the football, you can't block all of those dudes. So when I went back and watched Nichols, I'm like, wait a minute. Will Campbell just destroyed this man. Like, this man's going to be in a funeral parlor in less than 30 minutes. I mean, like, there were some really good performances. But, again, when you're lining up, Chris, the picture I just showed, the only guy not in what I, as an former offensive lineman, consider the box is the far corner on the other boundary. What are we discussing here? By the way, D'Anton Lynn did that too. Okay, and so that's where I look at this running game and say, all right, maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. Okay, but now you're really going to get tested. Because South Carolina right now could put 6 in the box and you ain't going to do nothing about it. So those are the challenges inside the game. I thought Brian Kelly yesterday, Chris, or Monday, excuse me, kind of played a little cat and mouse with Shane Beamer, because he said, all right, stack the box. Go ahead. Stack the box this week and see what's going to happen. I hate to say it like this. We want to look at this offensive line. Oh, they're going to come out and pound it. Chris, I got to be real with you. I am not testing that defensive line early at all. I'm going to throw that rock all over the place. If Garrett Nussmeier has 25 passing attempts in the first half, good. Back teams off of you. Get them off of you. And when teams are like, you know what, Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, if Chris Hilton comes back, if Mason Taylor, who's been exceptional so far this year, you got to back teams off. And, Chris, that's why you talked about John Emery. That's why John Emery had that success, because D'Anton Lynn and USC's second half adjustment was, hey, man, they're going to break our back if we don't back out. So then LSU started running the ball. Then they really went back to their ultimate game plan, and LSU and Joe Sloan didn't adjust. Garrett Nussmeier didn't adjust. That's why they ultimately got beaten, couldn't move the football. So that is the biggest concern in reference to the schematical details of what they're doing. I don't think that they haven't gotten push. Actually, I know that they've gotten push. I've seen it with my own eyes. These 2 eyeballs have seen them get pushed. But again, like the photo I just showed is just one small example of you can't run in that. Look, Hal Mummy, who was at Kentucky, and, Mike Leach comes from that. Hal Mummy was at Southeastern Louisiana when I was being recruited. And he used to tell me, and it was the part of the air raid. Chris, I played in the air raid system. Look how many guys came had 1,000-yard back the year that I committed, and then an 800-yard back. Hal Mummy, right? And so why did we do that? Because teams would put 5 dudes in the box. And if you're going to do that, we're going to run it right at you. And I think that Joe Sloan's inexperience at the current moment has hurt LSU to some extent. So I don't want to. I feel like I'm making excuses. I'm not. It's just I don't think if they are schematically doing things the way that they need to at the current moment.
And Blake, with the weapons you mentioned that they have at the wide receiver position, Mason Taylor at tight end, the offensive line, it feels inexcusable for LSU to not have balance. That's what's been most surprising to me is they just have not had balance. And I mean, to your point, we could beat a dead horse when you're talking about that Southern Cal game in week 1. But I mean, it just the offensive attack or lack thereof in that second half was maddening. And that's what made that loss so frustrating. On the other side, Blake, of the football, I look at this as this kind of feels like the opportunity for the South Carolina offense against the LSU defense. One of these two units can kind of springboard themselves into this season. Because I think if you look at it from the LSU defensive perspective, yes, you lose Jacoby and Guillory, and you mentioned Rocket Sanders in the offensive line, but also, I mean, Blake, it hasn't exactly been an offensive showcase in Columbia through 2 weeks.
No, they're 122nd in the country in total offense.
And on the other side, though, I think if you're South Carolina and you have a young quarterback in Lenora Sellers and you're on your home field, maybe you look at the LSU defense and say, hey, maybe this could be the breakout game for Rocket Sanders or Oscar Attaway or maybe even Sellers himself. So, like, when you look at that matchup, to me, Blake, that's the most fascinating part of this game because my biggest question is, can South Carolina keep up with LSU, who I think is going to score? I know South Carolina's been really good defensively, and I'd expect more of that out of the front seven, but I think LSU's going to get theirs. It's, can the LSU defense do what they didn't do last year and get those stops they need? And, again, I think it's just a fascinating matchup between we're going to leave this game. One of these two units we're going to be feeling really good about going through to the rest of the season. I just don't know which one it is.
Well, it's like, I brought up Les Miles earlier. South Carolina is what LSU used to do offensively. They're going to run it at you, and if you can stop it, all right, whatever. And we're going to keep running it right at you, and we're going to keep doing it. And you know what else we're going to do? We're going to keep running it right at you. And Chris, I think that that's a very effective style of football. Whether people want to agree with it or like the style or it's not flashy, who gives two Rudy Poos about flash when you're winning?
Especially when you have the personnel they have. I think that's
correct.
They have to run the ball to a degree.
They have to. But see, here's another thing that Brian Kelly described Lenora Sellers as someone that, like, he reminds him of Anthony Richardson. And when he first said that on Monday, I was like, I don't like that. But then I went back and watched again. Dude, the explosive plays that the kid had in the passing game, the outright howitzer that he had on the slant on the RPO for the touchdown against Kentucky, I'm like, you know what? He's probably right. Like this kid in Sellers, if he can't make if he doesn't make the mistake, Chris, of overselling a receiver and the ball getting picked off by Kentucky last week, what are we saying about him? Now, I look at Old Dominion. He's 10 for 23. I thought he had a lot of bad throws. But you know what he can do? He can line up, run it right at you. And, Chris, that's the part that worries me the most if you're the LSU defense. Now, I will say, last week against Nichols, LSU was vanilla as Bluebell ice cream. Shout out to Billy Lucci in the game at Texas A&M. But when you look at what they did against USC and stopping the run game, what did LSU do? Chris, this isn't a negotiable for me when I look at this matchup. I think that this is what they got to do. And if they don't do it, they're going to lose. You better stack that box, go man-to-man coverage on the outside and say, Lenora Sellers, listen, if you beat LSU through the air, have at it. Go ahead, put up Chris, if he throws for 500 yards, it is what it is. Don't let him and Rocket get downhill. Now, I will remind people, Shane Beamer did something last week that I thought was honestly one of the best coaching moves I'd seen in a while. Chris, Rocket Sanders had 7 carries for 11 yards at halftime. And what did he do? Okay, we're going to come right back at you, and you're not going to stop because we're going to lean on you and lean on you and lean on you. And if LSU, like you said, could separate early, you better stay with it the whole time and put them away, because if you don't, they're going to keep time of possession. Tick, 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 tick. And that's what's going to really hurt LSU. It's what hurt LSU against USC. And I know you said beating a dead horse, and you're right, but that's the style of play that I think South Carolina is going to come in here and do. And Chris, I got to be real with you. What are we going to say in the fourth quarter when Rocket Sanders gets an inside zone and Harold Perkins has to be there to meet him for the 7th time of the game? How much does that wear on these LSU backers? That in and of itself scares the bejesus out of me. And while Voodoo Dolls will be out in Baton Rouge this weekend on Lenore Sellers. And you might want to clip that out because people are probably going to get mad at me. I mean, Ruffino and Joe show, Joe already made fun of his goggles, and Joe wears goggles. He wears glasses. So, anyway.
Blake, thunderstorms are projected Saturday in Columbia. They're going to get some of that rain. It could be a wet, sloppy game. Who does that benefit more in your mind?
South Carolina. Yeah, South Carolina, without question. You're at home, Chris. You know the field. You know the turf. Look, I tell this to people all the time, especially if you're a dunk hunter. Rain falls different when you go different places. Grass is different when you go different places. I think it benefits South Carolina, Chris, because Garrett's ineffective in the running game. That's in and of itself. And again, that D-line is really good at South Carolina. So the only thing that I would say that would help LSU in this regard is we haven't seen them, be in a phone booth in reference to what happens when everything else is taken away with Garrett Nussmeier. And I think if you consistently lean on a team, which they did not do against these last 2 opponents, I would be interesting to see, for example, if LSU did what South Carolina did last week to Kentucky and kept running the football, what does it really look like through 4 quarters, Chris? We have never seen that in the BK era, and mainly because it was Jaden Daniels and other guys too. So, but it's South Carolina, so that's another thing. But adversity for LSU this week, dude.
Blake, in closing, when you look at this game, key to the game for LSU. Again, we talked about most important game, potentially the Brian Kelly era. What's LSU got to do to go into a hostile environment, college game day on site, maybe sloppy conditions, and come out with a much-needed win?
Here's what I would say. Is it Coldplay that sings this song? Light 'em up, light 'em.
I think we'll go with that. Sure.
Okay, maybe it is. Light them up through the air. Light that rear end up. Now, this kid number 7, forgive me, maybe you know his name.
Yeah, Nicky Minwori.
Okay.
Yeah.
That kid is a first-round talent. That kid can play. You're going to have to identify where he is. I'm really interested, Chris, to see what he does in man-to-man coverage against these dudes. Right? That I'm not saying Kentucky doesn't have dudes. You ain't got these dudes. All right. And so I think that he's the best overall player on that defense. So that's going to be an interesting matchup. If Kentucky's receivers can get open against your boundary corners, I think LSU's can. I mean, spare me. So I would light him up. I'd come out guns blazing, pedal to the metal, throwing that thing all over the place. I'd go full on air raid. I'm serious. I swear to God, back them out because I promise you, look, I don't know Shane Beamer. I've never had a conversation with him, but I know him well enough after watching him for so long or for these years. They're going to stack the box and stop what they want to do in the run. And I think that if they do that, LSU's got to throw the ball all over the place. And I don't think that they have the boundary corners to keep up with these receivers.
Blake Ruffino of AYS Sports. We're all looking forward to it. The matchup between LSU and South Carolina at Williams-Brice Stadium. College game day on hand. All eyes of the college football world will be watching intently, as will we in this game. Blake, appreciate you taking the time. Stay safe, my friend. Let me know if you need anything. And appreciate you. And by the way, congratulations on all your success.
Oh,
really proud of you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, episode 1000 this week. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was it's been fun, man. I like coming out here and yelling and being intense, and people pay me to do it, which is even better. So
not giving a Rudy poo. That's why we get along so well.
You know what? It's funny. I went back and watched episode 200 today, and I must have said Rudy poo like 17 times. So anyway, but thank you for having me, man. It's always fun to be here.
Blake, I appreciate it, man. We'll do it again soon.
Yep, no problem.